I just wanted to introduce our panelists tonight. We're doing a session here, a question and answer, a Q&A session on herb gardens. And with us is Monica with Skyridge Farms, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And Jalene, am I saying that right?
Yes, you are.
Okay. I want to make sure I butcher names really well. I'm good at butchering names. And you're with Utopia Gardens, correct?
Yes, I am.
All right. I'm going to put your contact information on how to order from you guys in the. They're both participating in the Curbside event. That's going to be held May 23rd at the Choctaw Library. They're both participating. It's a curbside event. You can do pre-orders through both of them, and just let them know your name and make sure you're using the same name with each vendor so we can group your orders together quickly for you. And they've got a great variety of items. I put just a general description, but I'm going to ask them at the end to kind of go through their selections and what they have available for the curbside event on May 23rd from 11 to noon. All right. I appreciate you both for doing this. This is awesome. Anyone that has a question for the panelist, you can either say it live or you can type it into the chat, and I will just let them know the questions that are coming in. I also have some questions prepared for anyone that is, in case we don't have a lot of questions. So we definitely have a lineup. While we're waiting on the questions to come in, how can y'all tell us a little bit how you got involved or interested in gardening and herbs?
Okay, about 30 years ago, I went to a meeting. There was a speaker on gardening with herbs and preserving herbs for posterity. And there were about 30 of us there. And when she was finished talking, we started the Herb Society. And 6 of us from that group went into little businesses because of different versions of what we loved about it. And I'm still she was an old lady then, I wasn't, and I'm the old herb lady now. So I'm still with it. So that's what happened to me.
And I had a friend that wanted to start selling herbs they were just starting the Cherry Street Farmers Market in Tulsa. Their very first year, 21 years ago. And we sold herbs in little 2-inch pots. And I shudder to think what we were selling. And our business just got bigger and bigger, and we learned much, much, much more. And I'm still doing it, I'm not selling at Cherry Street Farmers Market anymore. I got tired of waking up at 3:30 in the morning. But I still sell from my house and from many of the big herb festivals.
So one of the questions that's come into the chat to me individually, it says, I always have trouble growing rosemary. It starts out great, but never gets very big. They start strong. I was wondering if I could plant rosemary outside, not in a container, directly in the ground. If yes, how big should it be before I plant it?
Okay, this is a great question. And if you put a rosemary in a container, it will after a while, it'll get root bound. And when it gets root bound in the container, it rots. And that is the one thing that kills rosemary, is sitting in water and getting root bound in a container. So the very best thing you can do, and most rosemaries are hardy if you do it in the right place. I would put it in the ground, full sun, good drainage, on the south side of a building or your house, and don't let it sit in water. If you put it in a container, you can, and I would put it outside. Rosemaries are happy outside. You can leave it in the container over winter. If you pull it out of the pot, and every now and then check the roots. If it's root bound, cut about 1 inch off the bottom, put new soil in the bottom of your container, put it back, you'll be good to go. So you want to add to that?
rosemary must have air circulation. And unless they have a sunroom, I can't imagine that it's going to get 8 to 10 hours of sunlight. Think of, it's from the Mediterranean, so think of a Mediterranean hillside.
Yes, we're in Oklahoma. So
Does anybody have any questions they want to say live, or you could put them in the chat and I'll ask the questions?
I didn't bring a
I have a
rosemary.
question. I've never really grown herbs, but I'm interested. And so I'm wondering about, are there any that are, can't be planted near each other? Or converse to that, some that, you know, love to be near each other? Or does it matter? I mean, is there something where they have to be apart, or some that thrive if they're planted near each other?
you can do some herbs in like a container or a garden together. Like mint, of course, will take over. It depends on if it's sun or shade. Do you want to have it a kitchen garden to cook with? Rosemary, of course, can't sit in water with other herbs that require water. You could put oregano in a container. It will overwinter. If you're going to do it outside, you can do oregano. Chives would do fine. French tarragon would do fine. There are things that will overwinter. I would put basils in a pot by themselves because they tend to steal nutrition from the other basil. It's kind of like my grandchildren. Hello, I hope you're not on there.
Well, and not only that, basil's an annual, so probably watering would be the most something I would consider. So basil wants a little more water. Mint likes water, but rosemary, lavender, some of those things aren't going to want near the water that you would give the others. So I would probably plant them by water conditions.
And sun and shade, whether they like, there's a lot of herbs that like shade that you would be surprised. Parsley likes shade, salad brunette likes shade.
But only a half a day's shade.
Right.
I mean,
Morning sun, afternoon shade would be good in Oklahoma.
what herbs were you thinking about?
So I love basil and cilantro and oregano, and and then I thought chives, but is that chives are, that's more like an onion, right? Or no?
Yes, chives is, well, you know, you use them on your baked potatoes and on top of soups and things. Chives is a real easy perennial. You can plop those down in the ground with your oregano and never really worry about one of those. They'll take as much sun as you give them and not need much additional water. What did she mention though? Oh, you said cilantro. Okay, so let's talk cilantro in Oklahoma. You can really only grow cilantro like up until the 1st of June, and then it'll just bolt. And when it bolts, the seed is actually coriander, which is great. You can use it as a pepper substitute. But cilantro, it's way too hot during the summer for cilantro. And then you can replant it like in September, and it'll be fine. Oh, sometimes all through winter.
I've seen it green in January, but when you want it in July for your salsa, I would replant seed every 2 weeks. Let some of it go to seed, let some of it, harvest some of it, because once you harvest it, it's harvested.
Does that help?
I think she's right.
How do you suggest someone
Okay, and there are
saving
several.
harvested herbs? Like dehydrate? I'll repeat it.
Oh no,
Oh, no.
I don't even go to effort. I just cut them and lay them on a newspaper or a paper towel on the kitchen counter for a week to 10 days when they get crunchy. And then I slap them in a glass jar and put a lid on it. And if you notice any condensation, open the lid back up, leave it for another day or so, and then it's harvested. That's,
Yeah.
I mean,
That
Monica?
works. No, I can tell you that a lot of herbs don't dry well. They lose their nutrition, color, flavor. For example, parsley, chives are two of them, and I would freeze those. Basil, there's a
Freeze
trick
them in what? In oil?
in oil, or the chives and the cilantro, you can freeze just without oil or water. Now the basil I would put in oil because it tends to turn black if it's hits the air once it thaws out. So basil's a little tricky. You could chop your basil, put it in a little bit of extra virgin olive oil, put it in ice cube trays even. You can make a pesto and freeze it in ice cube trays, and then pop them out in the winter as you need to do that. Chives don't dry well, but they do freeze beautifully. And one thing on chives I want to mention is when you harvest chives, don't snip off the top of the plant. It's a hollow leaf. And when you snip off the top, air and water get in it, it turns brown. And I've killed a lot of chives that way. What you do is cut right down to the dirt. And in 3 or 4 days, you'll have a fresh new crop of chives. It's amazing. What else?
And you can also use the blooms of chives, just like you would chives. And that will also help you not have a million baby chives all over your garden.
Garlic chives will reseed everywhere. Your neighbors will have them. It's great. And they're a little bit different in flavor and they're easier to process, but they will be with you forever and ever.
So will oregano.
And oregano. But oregano does tend to lose its flavor after a few years. Did you know that? I learned that the hard way because I didn't cook for a long time. And I had a beautiful oregano plant and went out. Someone said, well, that's a beautiful oregano plant. Tasted it. After about 5 years or so with an oregano plant, it loses its flavor. You have to start over. And of course, I didn't know it because I didn't bring it in the kitchen. But I have, in the meantime, learned that you do have to start over. There are a lot of herbs that get woody, lose their flavor. You do just have to do cuttings if you can and start over. So sage is another one that does tend to get woody and quit on you a little bit.
But sage is real easy. I think after it blooms in the spring that you can trim it back to about 12 inches, 8 inches, and it'll flush out real pretty. Herbs like to be trimmed on.
I would say 1/3 of the plant at least.
2 or 3 times a year.
Yeah.
I think that would have saved her.
Oregano? Okay, I'm learning stuff here.
I just want to remind everybody.
Does that answer Elisa's?
That was Amanda's question. Did that answer your question? Yes. I just want to remind everybody you can either put your questions in the chat or you can go live and just ask your question. If you're not comfortable with that, please put them in the chat. I have a question. When can I plant basil?
Basil germinates at 70 degrees in the soil. If you have a heat mat inside or a heat source, that's good. They don't like to grow below 40 degrees. So now is a great time to start basil from seed. It's easy to plant. Do cuttings on another person's plant, or buy some and do cuttings. Jalene's on this. This is good. We're good. The cuttings are easy to do on basil. Everywhere the leaves come out, there will be roots if you put it down in loose potting soil. I don't like to start basil in water because I think the roots are wimpy.
I agree.
And if you put it in loose potting soil, breeding hormone or not, with basil in this time of year, the roots will push out. They'll be a lot stronger when you get ready to transplant it.
The only really hard time to plant herbs outside is probably like July and the 1st of August. You can plant herbs at any time, but she's right. Basil really, and you said 40, I would say 50.
Okay.
50 degrees is kind of.
That's, yeah, 40 is kind of down there.
Yeah,
that's true.
It's kind of a scary time. But basil's really only going to last till about Halloweeny, I always say.
Yeah.
And at that time, you can even cut your basil off and bring in a little bit. It's going to get leggy and
Woody.
looking for the sun.
Yeah.
But yeah, by Halloween, you probably need to have harvested most of the basil that you want.
So grow a lot of it and then harvest it, freeze it into pesto if you can, because it doesn't like to be in the house in the winter. I've tried it every way I can think of. It wants to go to seed, and that's what it will do. The stems get woody, the leaves get skinny.
Well, and she's saying pesto, you don't even really have to go all out with pine nuts and the whole
Parmesan,
bit.
yeah.
And the Parmesan, you can just really put the leaves in the least amount of oil, just enough to freeze it.
Yeah.
And then when they freeze, pop them out and put them in a baggie. So you don't even have to go the full, turning it into pesto might spook some people.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, you know, I mean, yeah, you can make pesto and that's awesome, but I'm too lazy.
I love pesto, but I'm too lazy too. One of the best pestos I have ever had is sorrel. Sorrel's a salad herb that grows all winter. It overwinters in the shade, likes water, and it's citrusy, tart, high in vitamin C. And one January, I had to have pesto, and I didn't have basil. And I went out and I got some sorrel and did it the very same recipe as a basil pesto. And oh my gosh, it was lemony, tart, beautiful. And that's my favorite pesto now. Have you ever done that?
No, but you can do parsley just like that
Yeah,
too.
parsley should go in it anyway.
Flat leaf parsley.
Yeah, because it's high in vitamin C and adds a lot of nutrition and flavor.
We have a question from Leslie. She's asking, how do you dry herbs?
Okay, it really depends upon which herb she's talking about. Because as Monica said, some herbs dry easier than others. For instance, rosemary is going to take quite a while. So it might even be easier if you wanted to dry rosemary to cut the sprigs off at about, I don't know, 6 or 7 inches and just make sure that they're getting air circulation, but put them in a canning jar on the counter and put like 6 or 7 sprigs and just let them sit there. And thyme also, because that's a little thicker. Yeah. And let it sit there. Oh, easy 10 days. It's going to depend upon the humidity in your house. You're only going to be able to tell when you try to strip the leaves off of the branch. And then I probably still wouldn't put the lid on the canning jar for a while.
Here's a good way to do it. This is what I try to do. If you get a paper sack, maybe even with handles, that's great. Put your harvested herbs down in the sack. Shake it every day.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, you can put it in a closet, where it's dark. The paper sack will keep the light off of it and the moisture off of it. And just shake it every day till it's dry. And I do a lot of tea herbs, TEA herbs, lemon verbena, cinnamon basil. There's a lot of tea herbs that dry real well like that. You can put them in a dehydrator. Oregano dries beautifully, keeps its color in a dehydrator. Maybe rosemary. I would not do a microwave ever. it would zap all the good oils out of them.
See, and I'm almost worried about the dehydrator. I mean, I know we always did that
Yeah.
with even rose petals and things like that. But when you can smell them as they're drying, it bothers me. I
Yeah,
always think
true.
I'm losing, you know,
Yeah,
my
something.
stuff. Yeah. Does that help?
I was waiting to see if Leslie
Tell me who's
responded.
out there.
She said yes, thank you. We have a good group. We have Alicia, Barbara, Leslie, Troy, Amanda, Sherry, Susan, Glenn, and Vicky.
Awesome.
We have a question from Vicky.
Hi, everybody.
She asks, when you store your dried herbs, do you leave the leaves whole or crush them?
I leave them whole until I need them. Just because you don't know what you're going to use them for. So when you crush them, I just think, now sage, I kind of like that kind of, I do crush my sage, but I don't even dry it anymore. I just go out and cut it whenever I want it. I'm really bad about just going out and getting it fresh. There's not, I mean, rosemary, you can cut all year round. And so I don't really dry a whole lot, but no, I wouldn't crush them first. What do you
Well,
think?
I would simply because if they're completely dry and you crush them, you can get more in the jar.
Oh, that's true.
And one of the main things I have to tell people about drying herbs and putting them in a jar, please label it, because I have so many jars in my she shed that are beautiful herbs and who knows what they are. So, I mean, lemon balm looks like peppermint and so on and so on. It's great, you know, if you don't care for the name on it. But that is one of the main ingredients to drying something, is to know what you have when you get finished.
That's a very good point. I have a couple of jars in my bathroom that.
Yeah, it smells good, but there you are. Peppermint dries beautifully if you do, and lemon verbena and lemon balm. And, you know, I crunch it up because I want to put it in tea blends eventually. I'm all about the tea blends. And the more you crunch it up, if it's completely dry, of course, the more you're going to get in one jar and label it. So that's my version.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. You could get more in there.
I'm new to gardening. How easy would you say it is to start an herb garden?
Ridiculously easy. Because you can start in a pot, you can start in you can just start an herb garden with one plant. Probably what I would say is, first of all, decide if you just want to smell them or if you want to use them, and if so, what herbs you want to use. And then maybe you just like the looks of it. My mom has tons of herbs, but the only thing she ever does is, besides sage, is smell them and crush them up in her fingers. So, you know, she has a different kind of an herb. It depends. If you're going to do a tea garden, like Monica would do, that's a totally other different thing. But there's like super, super easy.
I would say if you're going to do a kitchen herb garden, start outside your back door by your kitchen. You put a big container out there and put the herbs you're used to cooking with in it together. You can always move them somewhere later. There's a lot of starting over in Oklahoma, and I hear that all the time. And I say, people say, well, I moved here from Seattle. I don't understand why things don't over winter. And I'm sorry, but Oklahoma changes every 30 minutes some weeks. So you have to decide, you put them all in a container if you have a new house or you're just starting a new kitchen garden. Put it outside your kitchen door, run out there, snip on it, and then decide where the sun is right and the drainage is good. And then you can, you know, gradually move things around a little bit.
because some things take a lot more room than you think. I'll never forget when my daughter planted, brand new gardener, and she's not a very good gardener, I'll admit. And she planted rosemary and oh, what's the one that you just talked about that tastes like cucumber? Or salad burnet, and some stevia. And her stevia, for whatever reason, got giganticus, and it tried to attack her rosemary. And so you do need to find out what things are going to grow really well in your herb garden.
Yes.
And so you can space them differently.
We have a couple of questions in the chat. The first one is, should you rinse off the herbs before you dry?
That's a good question. And different people have different versions of that. I don't, we don't use chemicals, you know, so I don't necessarily feel like that is an issue. You can bring, if there's not a lot of dirt collected on it, I don't see a big deal on rinsing and drying. What do you think?
I'm so glad you said that. I don't think I ever rinse my herbs.
We don't rinse our herbs.
Yeah, I mean, I don't put anything on it. I mean,
Yeah.
rain is the only thing. And I mean, I don't think it would hurt. I just don't,
It's
just
going to
don't
take
bother.
longer to dry. So, good question.
Next question came from Barbara. She asked, once they're dried, crushed, and bottled, how long do they last?
Oh, forever.
well, and I think after 4 or 5 years, I'd probably want to refresh them just because it's pretty easy. So once again, it's going to depend upon the quality, and it's going to depend upon if you kept them in a dark space,
Right.
and if they didn't have a lot of temperature changes. It's just going to be like anything you can. I try to keep them, so that they don't get too hot, so it doesn't get too cold. Although I don't know that that would really affect it. What do you?
But light, if you have them in a glass jar, the side toward the light is going to fade, and that's not pretty. You know, and they lose. You know, eventually it takes a while. I would say a few years too before that would happen. If you have them on a shelf away from a window, you know, in a cabinet with a door, they're going to keep for a very, very long time, years. If you don't have them in a cabinet and it's facing a window, they're going to fade on that side of the jar.
Well, just think about the herbs that you buy, you know, in the little McCormick's can.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I'd hate to tell you how old my nutmeg is, but so I think if you take the lid off and smell it,
yeah,
and as long as it's got, you know, the lemon verbena smell or the rosemary smell, you're good to go. You're good. But I'm going to say 4 or 5 years.
Yes, I'm with Jalene.
Leslie's read somewhere that to use dark glass jars. Is that something that you've used before?
Well, I do have some dark blue glass jars that I use for some of them. And that's good that it keeps light out, just like Monica said, so it doesn't deteriorate the attractiveness and the appearance of your herbs. But if you keep them in a cabinet behind a door, I think that's the same. I think the whole purpose of using a dark jar is to keep the light out of it, don't you?
I agree, except that I so enjoy seeing them in the glass jar on the shelf, and you know, even if I don't ever, you know, shake them out. So.
This question, it says, could you name 3 to 5 easy, tasty herbs that are super easy to grow?
Oh, wow. Okay, so I'm going to get my list. I think basil is easy as long as it's in the summer. And and as long as you give it plenty of sun. Bronze fennel is ridiculously easy. I think garden sage is almost scary easy. Parsley's easy, except you have to remember it's a biennial. And so the second year it can be a little bitter. Is that the right word? The butterflies like it. I think mints are incredibly easy and winter savory. Those are my top. So you go.
They are. Oregano's super easy. Thyme, it really is not that hard to grow either, and it's worth it. Thyme, I think, you know, maybe raised beds on everything. In Oklahoma, we have clay soil, so I would say anything you put in raised bed with good loose soil, good drainage, you're going to have a lot of luck with. Basil's really easy. From seed, that would be probably the easiest. You know, arugula is fairly easy, the rocket arugula.
Except it's not really a summer.
Oh, it's not.
Well, I mean, don't you think it goes to seed?
Yes, it does. It does tend to bolt. There's a few that do and a few that are, you know, kind of like cilantro does. So I'd say give it a try. Anything that I get lists from people all the time that have a wish list that they see things in books or on the internet that aren't going to work in Oklahoma. They don't work at Skyridge Farm anyway. But I hate to tell people, oh, that'll never work. You know, I've tried everything just because. And so I am now down to my version of my favorite things. And I know how to do that. And it's too much fun. And a lot of it is just for the fragrance and the beauty. It's not necessarily, you know, culinary or medicinal, but medicinal is a real important aspect also of herb gardens. And so I have a medicinal garden. I call it my first responder garden. And I have a culinary garden, which I don't go out to very often. And then I have a posterity garden, which is things that I've saved, you know, for posterity, for the generations to come. And then I have part of my garden is everlasting, that I grow things to make wreaths out of in the fall. So there's scented. I have a scented geranium collection, which is only just cute, and I have a greenhouse full, but it's well worth it to me. So it depends on what you love, and that makes it easier, I think.
And lavender and rosemary are probably one of the very popular. The only thing that makes them difficult is that they want to drink and then they're done with the water. So you've got to make sure that they're not setting in wet soil. And they also need air all the way around them. Once again, think French countryside. And they have a tendency to still need to be watered in not this last year, Oklahoma, but in December and January and February, if we don't get any rain, they still need the humidity, and our humidity is zero at that, usually at that time. So that's what makes rosemary and lavender so difficult in Oklahoma.
The next question in the chat is Leslie's asking, should you put mulch around the herbs?
I say no. But what do you say? You say yes?
I say no, simply because you can keep an eye on if the roots are heaving, if there's bugs in it. You know, I have a garden and I try to mulch it with, just because I want it to be pretty, but I have it raised, the parts, you know, I have it raised up also. Keeps the weeds down. But if you have a huge garden, you're going to have to do something about the weeds. But mulch in a container, I don't think is necessary. If you have good potting soil, and usually on herbs, I would say a loose potting soil, not a heavy potting soil. Don't you think?
Exactly.
So they don't retain water. I don't think you need mulch. I mean, it's pretty. I'm not real big on bark mulch at all. It tends to leach nitrogen from the soil. So, you know, you have to kind of watch what you're mulching with also. I don't like mulch.
I don't either.
We don't like mulch. Okay.
Alicia's asking, what's in your medicinal, like what's in a medicinal herb garden? Not particularly. I butchered that question.
Okay. That's okay. I know what you're asking. And I have this, I live on 10 acres in the middle of nowhere. And so, you know, it's hard in the middle of winter when it's icing to get in the car and run to the drugstore for this and that. So I try to keep herbs out there. I call it my first responder garden that, you know, and especially old fashioned herbs. Like for example, comfrey is one of the best medicinal herbs. Yeah, well, you don't take it internally. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, careful.
Don't make a tea. But what you do with it is, for example, it's a healing herb on torn muscles. They called it knit bone back in the old days, but it has a property in the leaf that promotes cell growth. And so I was going to have a shoulder surgery. I had an 80% tear in my shoulder. I made an olive oil liniment salve with mullein flower. Mullein flower is anti-inflammatory. And in 3 weeks, I could, you know, at that point when I was scheduled for surgery, I couldn't lay down, I couldn't use my arm. And in 3 weeks, I was so much better, I canceled the surgery and I have full rotation on my way back. You look. So comfrey is one I would keep for sure. What other?
Peppermint.
Peppermint's good for your stomach. Ginger's good for your stomach. Ginger, of course, you can grow. It's not easy, right?
It depends upon your site.
Yeah.
Ginger is going to be kind of an iffy one, but peppermint is a great one to soothe stomach. I have horehound.
I have horehound.
And that's good for coughs. And anyway, I remember my grandfather always using horehound drops. You can put it in your tea. I don't know. What else do you have in your medicinal? I don't do medicinal.
Burdock root is good for psoriasis. It's very easy to grow. It's enormous. It's beautiful.
Oh, calendula.
And calendula is very good for skin. First, there are herbs that are good for your skin if you have different issues with your skin. Calendula's plantain is good. Of course, that's a seasonal spring native. There's a lot of native herbs that are good for medicinal.
Jewelweed for poison ivy.
Yeah.
Oh, sage for sore muscle bath.
And for colds, sage is good for sinuses. I had to run out to the garden and get, you know, when I had the flu in the winter and couldn't, that's been years ago, wasn't this year.
Eucalyptus.
Yeah, eucalyptus. Eucalyptus is awesome because it opens your sinuses. My husband had a cough for 2 months, and I heard from people that knew how to do this, but you put eucalyptus oil or eucalyptus, you boil your water in a stainless steel pan, you put it in the sink, turn it off, put it in the sink, it's steaming. You add the oil or the plant, and you put a towel over your head, and you get over that pan, and you inhale very slowly at first, and in 2 days, their cough they'd had for months was gone, my daughter-in-law and my husband. And it opens your sinuses. You hang it in the shower. If people have sinus problems, and who in Oklahoma doesn't have allergies, you know, that your head gets stopped up.
But anyway, so yeah, medicinal can go on and on.
Yes,
but
it
those are
can.
some real common ones.
Yeah.
And I think you touched on it, but Vicki asked, sage is antibacterial, correct? But I'm pretty sure you.
Yes.
Oh, yes. And lavender.
And lavender.
And
Lavender would be you talk about first responder. Lavender is antiseptic, antimicrobial, antibacterial, all the antis. And it would be my first responder thing to a burn because it will kill bacteria. It's antiseptic. Chamomile is a beautiful tea herb for a lot of different things. And for example, tea tree oil. Of course, I don't have a tea tree, but chamomile is good to brew. If, like, for example, my son was in Afghanistan and he got a foot condition, all the soldiers did from marching through raw sewage. And the cream they gave him didn't help. And chamomile tea bags in his boots and tea tree oil kept it livable till he got home. And but it's antifungal. tea tree and chamomile are antifungal also. There's another 2 good antis. So there's a lot of medicinal benefits out there. You know, if you research how to do it and what to use it for, it's nice to know.
Alicia says she needs your recipe that you used on your shoulder.
Yes. I know I get a lot of, if I tell that story, I get a lot of, it's so easy. So what you do, comfrey is a big hairy leaf, and what you do is you take it and julienne it like you would a basil, chop it up, put it in a mason jar, glass mason jar, fill it with extra virgin olive oil. And a lot of people say, oh, that's too greasy, but there's a lot of healing properties in olive oil also.
Oh yeah, people just put it on their face.
I know, I don't do that. I can't do that.
I know, but some people do.
Yeah. Coconut oil would maybe be a little lighter if you don't like the greasy olive oil thing. So what if, like, for example, for my shoulder, then you have it in the jar, you put it in the sun where it gets heated, shake it every day. And I start using it immediately. And I tell people they can go ahead and use it immediately. It gets stronger every day. It doesn't get rancid. I put mullein flowers in it because there's an anti-inflammatory property in mullein flowers. And if you don't know what mullein is, it's amazing. It's a native, big, hairy, gray leaf plant that puts up tall spikes. And yellow flowers, but the flowers are like pinhead. And you go out and start picking those flowers out of that mullein plant. So I order mine from an organic grower. And
wow, you do?
Well, mountain rose.
Oh,
I just don't have the patience to pick all those little yellow flowers off that mullein. But I put it in with the comfrey and put a towel on so you don't grease up the bed, you know, sleeping overnight, leave it on overnight. And truly, it's amazing what it doesn't. Don't ever put comfrey oil on an open wound because it heals over so fast.
Or a broken bone.
Yeah, right. It's a broken skin tear or anything, because it heals over so fast that it might set up a bacterial thing inside. And actually, I've had goat farmers buy comfrey and do poultices, and they said, you know, their little goats did have broken legs. They healed pretty fast. They were little tiny legs.
But let's not do it on humans.
Okay, let's not. Let's don't do it on human legs. Okay, there you go. But on a torn muscle or a ligament, mine was my rotator cuff. It was great. So
my husband has like the muscle down his arm that he tore, and then about the time it heals, 6 or 8 months, he's like, oh, it feels better, and then he does the thing again and messes it up again, and then he's just like, ugh, and he's at the point right now where he only has about this much motion, and I'm just so over listening to it. So I keep,
well, you know, the trouble.
So
what did he have? Tell me again.
I'm not exactly sure because he hasn't been to the doctor. I say go to the doctor, he doesn't go to the doctor, but he complains about it a lot.
Don't give her medicine.
And so I'm just like,
Okay.
give me something to try.
What did he hurt? I didn't hear that part.
His shoulder. He so it's kind of like in the
okay.
shoulder joint, but also it's like the muscle just from the shoulder down toward his elbow a little bit. It just he can't raise his arm above his head. He doesn't have a whole lot of range of motion in it. He's just like, oh, every time he moves it. So I thought maybe that's
He
something
probably needs to go.
It sounds like we need an intervention to get him to the doctor.
We'll come get him. Okay, there you go. That's awful because that is painful. And a lot of these joint problems are joint problems. You know, that knees are bone on bone and hips are bone on bone, and there's nothing that will help that but the doctor. So sorry. That's, oh. Our internet connections.
Is there any herbs that are not safe to be around children or dogs that you wouldn't recommend growing around your dogs or children?
I have 14 grandkids, so they have pretty much the run of the place. The only thing, but they've all totally ignored it, I even grow castor bean. Now, nobody's ever messed with it or anything. I grow black castor bean, but that is poisonous to dogs and humans, obviously. They make rat poison out of it, but I've never had anybody touch it. But that's the only, but just like, what's the heart, digitalis?
Yeah, that's foxglove.
Foxglove is poisonous.
It is. I have to tell you this though, elderberry. People have been, looking for elderberry because of the flu going around right now. Which, if you sell somebody an elderberry plant, it's 2 years before it's ever going to put on flowers or berries anyway. But from a transplant, I have them. They're beautiful. Elderberry is toxic in every part of it until the berries are completely ripe.
I did not know that.
Yeah, the leaves, the stem, and I hesitated to send it home with somebody and they think, oh, well, I'm not going to get berries. I'm just going to make a tea out of the leaves because it's not safe. The flowers are fairly okay. People make cough medicine out of elderberry flowers. It's good for, that. The berries are very good for the flu as far as an immune system herb or an antioxidant herb, but they have to be completely ripe or cooked or frozen or so on and all three. Elderberries. They have them at Walmart.
No, I meant the elderberry gummies that are already done.
Yes. And the birds get mine anyway before I get out there to get the berries. So I enjoy the flowers and then the birds get the berries. And you can order elderberry flowers dried. For example, from the same place that I order my mullein flower, I can get elderberry berries and then go with a syrup. Maybe in the winter, if you've got the flu and you want an elderberry syrup, you can do it that way. But I hesitate to recommend elderberry as a plant because it isn't safe. Pokeberry is poisonous.
Yeah,
that'll do you in. So,
yeah, but so are tomato plants. I mean, you're not. Tomato plants. You're not. The leaves are poisonous. So are potatoes. So I mean, there are lots of things like that. I just haven't had anybody inquisitive enough to do that.
We have one more question. Let's see. It says, what do you use the castor bean for? They see a ton of them around, but no idea what people do with them.
Okay, so it's a old farmer's almanac thing that if you plant castor beans, it'll keep gophers away. I actually live in the middle of Creek County, and apparently our gophers don't care, but I plant the black one because it's just gorgeous. It looks real tropical and gorgeous, but that's the only reason I plant it. It does not overwinter. Now, however, I've had volunteers come. I mean, if it drops the seeds and I don't pick them up, harvest them, I've had volunteers come up the next year, and they're even stronger and bigger. But no, that's why I want to make that very clear. That's what I do with my castor bean. I'm trying to keep gophers away, but otherwise it's just
pretty.
The black one's pretty. I don't make that.
What are some things that you have available for the curbside pickup?
I have African blue basil, which is a great pollinator plant. I do have some people that make pesto out of it. Bronze fennel, curry, sage, rosemary, flat leaf parsley, curly parsley, calendula, I'm a heavy mint person. So I've got chocolate and strawberry and lime and orange and spearmint, pineapple sage, and winter savory.
Oh my gosh. I'm gonna order, I've already got an order for Jalene.
What do you have,
Okay, that's
Monica?
what I have. Get ready. Marseille basil. That's a dwarf bush large leaf heirloom French sweet basil. That's my favorite. I have Marseille basil. It's a sweet basil. It's beautiful. Rosemary, salad burnet, lemon balm, catnip, feverfew, lamb's ears. Those are medicinal. They stop bleeding in an emergency. I don't have the kind that blooms. I have the landscape type. Hyssop makes a great tea. Greek oregano, sweet marjoram, English thyme, French thyme, lemon thyme, garden sage, lemon verbena, ornamental oreganos, hardy lantana, coronation gold yarrow, germander, sweet lavender. I have a mosquito repellent bush marigold, copper canyon. Then I have miniature roses, raspberry plants, scented geraniums, bay laurel, and eucalyptus.
Got it all?
We did. We've got it all. There you go.
What's the best place for people to reach you to do the orders?
Well, they can call, they can text, they can email, either whatever's easier for them.
Facebook or email or the phone.
Yeah, I have a Facebook, it's Utopia Gardens.
Yeah, I put all that information in the chat, and I'll also put it when I post it on the YouTube channel. When I post it on the Facebook page, it'll have all the information on how to reach you as well. And we also have in the chat the list of all the vendors that are doing the curbside event and the silent auction items. I'm really excited. This has been a great session. I've learned a lot.
Okay, I have my drawing. What are you calling it? Your silent auction. I'll show
Oh,
you what-
cool. Yes, let's see it.
And I meant to bring something, and I
Oh,
didn't.
that's okay.
Oh, how pretty.
Miniature roses. Silk.
Pretty.
Can they see them?
I think.
Silk color. This is fun.
Oh, that's a pretty eucalyptus.
This is bay trees and scented geraniums. So, that'd be cute.
That's
Excellent.
great. Well, thank you guys for doing this. I'm already seeing thank yous in the chat. This has been a lot of great information. We appreciate having you out. Our next
Sandra,
session,
go ahead.
I was going to say our next session is coming up here in a few minutes. It's baking with Katie Pies and Moors, and she's going to bake a delicious lemon raspberry sweetbread. It's going to be a good time. So anybody that wants to stick around, we'll be getting started here in about 3 minutes. So do y'all have any last words before we wrap this up?
Tell them they can always email or text their questions, you know, if
Yeah.
they think of it later on.
Perfect. Well, we really appreciate it. This has been a great session.
We like to talk.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, y'all. You have a good night. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.